Okay, so I'm gonna be putting these videos up a little bit out of order right now. And the reason is because as I'm finalizing your syllabi, I'm realizing that you may have some um, concerns about the major single assignment that we have, and that's the to write a manuscript, a 25-page manuscript. So I figured we should probably get this video up first because some of you may look at the syllabi, see this, and then have a lot of questions. And this will kind of explain what's to be expected in that, but also what is to be expected in any professional manuscript that we create. So you do have to, well, you don't have to, but I wish that you would excuse me. I apologize. I'm recording this in my office, and one of the things I had to do was turn off the air conditioner because it is super loud. So I'm going to be lecturing. It's 78 degrees in my office right now, so we'll see how high that gets, how warm it gets in here. I do have a bottle of water, so I'll be stopping to drink in. At times I may sound loopy because I might be suffering from heat exhaustion. So, cool. So I hope you're all well. I'm glad that you're here in this class. This is going to be, I think, a fun class, and I say that, and I think I say that for a lot of the classes that I teach because it's always fun for me. But I think that you're going to get something practical out of this class, or at least I hope you get something practical out of this class. Our first night when we meet, we're going to talk a little bit about everybody's goals, what they want to do, who they want to be when they grow up. And I feel that while you may look at the syllabi and be like, oh man, I have to write a 25-page paper, you'll find that most of us in academia have to write 25-page papers on a regular basis. So if you were looking to get into a doc program, you're going to write big papers like this. If you're looking to someday teach, you're going to write big papers like this. If you're looking to only do clinical work and just do assessment, you're going to write papers like this. So we should all get used to it. The good thing is that you can work in a group, so you can split the writing into bits if you'd like. So the manuscript that's going to be due is going to be similar to what we're speaking about in here. So I'm going to give you a brief little history about why we write as professionals. You might be like, oh, wait a minute, scientists and practitioners. The video that I'm going to record and post later will kind of explain how counselors are scientists and scientists are counselors and so forth and so on. So as always, I welcome you to write down any questions that you have while you're watching this video, bring them to class, and we will try to answer them best as possible. Okay? So why do we write? Writing is such a pain in the ass. I don't think I've ever met anybody who loves to write. I mean, I'm sure there are writers out there who really enjoy the process. Most of us as counselors don't like writing. And the reason why, as I got to close the blinds in my office so the sun's not coming in, I think that we tend to not like writing only because we want to work with people. When we're writing, we are being taken away from that process. When I have to write for when I write manuscripts and for submission, that takes up a good deal of my time. So whether I'm with my wife at home, or I'm with students, or I'm with clients, if I'm doing those things, I'm not writing, which means that if I'm writing, I'm not doing those things. So for me, it is kind of a bummer. It is a necessary evil that we do have to capitulate to and engage in, but it does make us better, and it does help our counseling profession as a whole. So why do we write? Well, the process of writing facilitates further learning as researchers seek to develop a new understanding of a topic and ensure that they are aware of knowledge in an area. And so if we kind of dissect that for a bit, we're trying to develop new understanding, which means we're not going to be trying to understand something that has been understood before. For example, whenever I ask students about what are their interests in research, a lot of times I will get things like, oh, I'm interested in how CBT works for people diagnosed with schizophrenia. Like, yeah, that's cool, but there's a ton of research that's already out there, and that's really nothing new. So it's our job to find something new. In the video that I'm going to post later on, maybe tomorrow or the next week, we'll kind of explain a little bit about becoming scientists and what scientists do. And counselors as scientists, and it'll make a little bit more sense. Writing also forces us to develop more deeply into a subject, which facilitates a renewed perception of the subject and inspires creativity and thinking. And that's kind of a cool thing. So when we go to research or we go back to research, we have to become more intimate with that research. So if you research any given subject once, you're going to get a nice overview. When you go through it a second time, you're going to pick up on things that you didn't notice before. And when you continue to go back and you continue to research that area over and over again, you're going to get down to the bottom and you're going to get to a place where you're looking at things that nobody has ever looked at before, which is a really, really cool thing. And it will inspire this creativity and this thinking process. And so what we hope is that you start making connections where whatever the subject matter you're in, you start making connections to things outside of that subject matter. So now we're starting to link certain subject matters together. Writing also improves the researcher's ability to teach and to practice as he or she is compelled to synthesize information and generate new perspectives. And yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. Writing contributes knowledge to the profession, and counseling is a fairly young profession, and most of our writing, I'd say the bulk of our writing, really has to do with understanding qualitative properties or the understanding the phenomenology of very small groups. We don't do a lot of big data type research, which we're actually going to do in this class a little bit. Involvement in writing projects also offers counselors opportunity to develop a professional community, which becomes a source of collaboration across institutions, geographic regions, and disciplines. One of the things that I love about my doctoral cohort from Duquesne, is that we all graduated. Most of us have graduated already when we completed our dissertations. But we all stay in touch. And so if somebody's writing with something, like I'll have a colleague who's writing this article, and then we'll say, hey, can you add something about narrative counseling? I'll be like, yeah, sure. And then all of a sudden now they say, okay, and I'll put you as second or third author. It's like, cool. So now I'm getting publications that I normally wouldn't get if I didn't have that connection. And then when I write, I'll do the same thing where I will include people into my writing so that they're getting credit as well. If you wish to, if you wish to pursue any type of academic position, unfortunately, you have to write. It is critical to tenure and for promotion. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what tenure is, tenure happens around year 5 for your faculty, including your faculty here at Kutztown. And during those 5 years, it's actually 4.5 years, you have to compile evidence that says that you should be able to stick around for a long period of time. And you do this through research, and you do this through writing, and you do it through service and through teaching and all these different things. But you won't get tenure if you're not writing, and that's the tough part. So for people who want to teach, teaching definitely is great. And my first university that I taught at, Immaculata University, was a strictly teaching school. But even there, we had to have some level of research that we were engaging with on a regular basis in order to show that we were worthy of tenure. Here at Kutztown, it's kind of a 50-50. You have to do some research. You definitely have to have good teaching marks, and you have to do some service as well. So it's pretty well rounded here. You go to places that are R1s, Research 1 schools, or R1 aspiring schools like Duquesne University, and they call those publish or perish universities. And basically, if you don't publish enough during your time pre-tenure, you won't get tenured and you'll get fired, and you'll have to go find a new position. So it's something to really think about when you're deciding what type of PhD or PsyD program you want to get into, is how much you're willing to write. So some challenges and strategies. So contrary to popular lore, many authors find writing to be challenging. And I think I said it, and I'll tell you 1,000 times, I hate writing. But it's definitely something that that you have to engage in. And I think when you engage in it, you become better at it. I think I'm a better writer. I'm laying back up. I know I'm a better writer than what I used to be, even though I haven't learned to like it anymore. The concept of writer's block has become popular lore with many writing communities. And varying perceptions exist regarding what constitutes writer's block. I get writer's block all the time. I have writer's block right now. I should be writing 3 different manuscripts at this moment, and I have writing block, and I'm not working on it right now. Let's talk a little bit about what it is. The term is often used, but perhaps best considered a social construction that is indicative of some obstacle to writing. And I think that's what it is. What is stopping us from writing, right? Like, so I'm not writing right now because I'm teaching and because I'm getting ready to move and because we're getting ready to adopt a greyhound, right? And we're doing it. But I could write, but I'm using all of these things as roadblocks to justify me not writing at this moment, which is not good. So it's been described that writer's block among academics as intellectual, personal, and political. And so I'm really, really, really good at intellectualizing and making things more important than they actually are. Some common challenges to writing kind of fall into these three primary categories: technical errors, external realities, and psychological obstacles. Technical errors is something that we're going to try to get over in this class, and that really has to do with the construction of the manuscript. Technically, how does that look? What does it look like in the process of doing that? External realities, sometimes, the dog does get sick and you got to take it to the hospital, you know what I mean? And you can't write. So those things happen. If I'm teaching on Monday and Wednesday nights, chances are I'm not going to be able to write during that time. And then there's the psychological obstacles that are there as well. So the technical errors encompass struggles that exist as a result of lacking a specific skill or technique, like failing to set aside specific time for writing, disorganization and space and tasks that prevents a person from knowing what to work on next, and relying upon a list of tasks that are too complex and not specific or measurable, and underestimating how long it will take to require for completion. This really just harkens back to dissertation. And, for me, there was one of my mentors gave me a book called Destination Dissertation, which was a fantastic book. And what I liked about it is it explained every single piece of the dissertation, and it told me exactly how many hours to expect that I would have to spend on this, which was nice because it allowed me to say, like, okay, literature review. How long should my lit review take? Oh, okay, so that's going to take me about 100 hours. Wow, I didn't realize. So then when you think about that, that's a little more than 2 weeks of full-time work right there. And some people do lit reviews quicker, some do them a little bit slower, but on average, how many hours it would take. But it really put it into perspective on how much I should be spending and how much time I should be spending. And most people who do not complete their dissertations are part of this group that just either are awful time managers and they're not understanding priorities and how long this is actually going to take, or they have this fantasy about what a dissertation is and how easy it is. They complete it and then they get rejected because they didn't do it appropriately. So some strategies: making behavioral adjustments or acquiring specific skills, which we're going to do in this class. External realities are best described as situational or environmental factors that are outside of one's control, such as health problems, life transitions, such as a new child, an aging family member. And these challenges generally require patience and creativity in redistributing one's workload or delegating tasks while adjusting to life circumstances. And so that's part of that life management piece. The psychological obstacles are more complex, therefore require more time and attention, and they could be such experiences as academic perfectionism, which I'm sure a lot of your professors struggle with, feeling disempowerment related in their research or in their writing, fear of being exposed by one's writing, which I think is a huge fear as well, crisis of legitimacy, right? Like it's kind of like the what's the social psychology, the imposter syndrome that I talk about sometimes. Sometimes you feel like in class, like, I shouldn't be here, I got in here by accident. Well, that's how writers feel too. Like, can I legitimately write about this? Am I a fraud? Will people think that I'm knowledgeable enough about this? Lack of clarity regarding one's longer term visions or goals, and unrealistically high expectations. What we're going to do in this class is we're going to prepare manuscripts, and we're going to find journal articles to submit them to. And we're going to see if we get rejected or not. And chances are, and I hate to kind of put this out there, but we're going to be rejected, and that's okay. I was an editorial fellow for Counselor Education and Supervision Journal last year, and we only accepted about 20% of articles that came through, which means that 80% of them were going right out the door. Without any further review. And so a lot of people think when they're writing that everything's going to be accepted and they're not going to have any problems, and that's just not the truth. So, leading experts on behavioral patterns of prolific writers have highlighted the importance of developing a practice of daily writing. Yeah, it's kind of like going to the gym. You got to get up, and you got to write a little bit every day. Except for the extraordinary few, authors need to rewrite and edit in order to complete a writing task. I don't care how great of a writer you are. You have to rewrite and you have to edit. Now, when I say rewrite, you don't have to redo the whole thing. You might have to move some stuff around, but you definitely need to go back and edit. You need to write and then take some time off, a day or two, and then come back and reread with a fresh set of eyes. And you're going to see and hear things that don't sound right. I also suggest using an editor as well, having somebody who will be able to look over everything and give you some pointers of what they're hearing. Most of us, and some of you might be able to acknowledge this right now, but most of us write in kind of a stream of conscious kind of way. I write the way I speak. And so I will write something. I'll be like, that makes perfect sense. And I do use my wife as my editor. She's an excellent writer, way better than I am. But she's an attorney and she writes briefs and she's writing all day, every day. So it's understandable. And that's why I use her. And she'll just be like, what in the world does this mean? And then I'll think to myself, what do you mean you don't know what that means? Like, you have, like, I know it. And I'm like, because I didn't explain this or because I assumed that. And then I have to go back and I have to reword things. And there's usually some embarrassment that goes along with that because sometimes I'll write a sentence and I'll just be like, I have no idea what that means. That doesn't even sound like English to me. And that happens. And so if you can get over that embarrassment, if you can get over that feeling of being judged, and that's why I like using somebody who's close. I don't have to feel, I don't typically worry about my wife judging me. So I trust her input and I'm able to kind of explore that on my own. Different writers use different methods. For example, some write as fast as possible and rely on heavy revision to create a polished product, whereas some write the first draft carefully and minimize time with revisions. That's me. I'm one of those people that if I'm going to sit down and write, I'll sit down and write for 8 to 10 hours at a time, but I'm going back and I'm making sure that everything is spelled correctly. I'm making sure that my grammar is pretty much okay, that my verbs are in agreement, my tenses are where they need to be. Because I don't like to go back and do heavy revisions myself, and this is just me because I get really discouraged when I see that there's a ton of revisions. So I like to make sure that it's kind of good off the bat. Authors often become absorbed in their project, and they can lose objectivity as well. And that's something we're going to talk about in class a little bit more. So it's strongly recommended that all authors have a colleague or an advisor read and critique their research reports as part of the writing and revision process. I use Dr. Hamlet here. I say, read this over and tell me if this makes sense. So I'll ask. I'll say, can you read this over and tell me if this makes sense? And I try to use people that are in my field or study what I like to study because they'll look at it and they'll say like, wow, I'm not sure you're going down the right path or it sounds like you're really trying to push this or whatever it may be. It may be best to choose an individual who could be counted on for constructive and critical feedback rather than glowing compliments. And you know what? This is why I typically, in your papers that I give back to you, I'm not like, oh wow, this is wonderful and this is excellent, and I just don't like to do that because the compliments don't get you anywhere. You have to be able to take criticism and critique, and my supervisees will definitely attest to that. Especially if you're in my internship class, I'll tell you right off the bat, you're all the best counselors in the world. Now it's time to get down to business and start picking apart the things that we need to fix. But we need to have something in order to ensure that writing process improves constantly. If you're a bad writer and people keep telling you that you're great and you're wonderful, you're never going to get better. But if you're a good writer and people keep pointing out things that you can change, you're going to get better. Problems related to procrastination are pervasive amongst academic writers. Preach, like that is an awful phenomenon is procrastination, but a lot of us really fall into the traps of procrastination. Many researchers who enjoy conducting research or engaging in clinical practice avoid sitting down to write. That's why I have 12 different research projects going on and not one of them have been written up. So yeah, I'm more of an applied researcher rather than a writer. But once started, writing becomes increasingly easy. And that is something Dr. Hamlet and I have been talking about because she's writing an article with me. And it is something, once you sit down and you actually start writing, the writing process it becomes much, much easier. Kind of like for those of you who have gone to the gym. Going to the gym at first sucks. But once you go a few times, you're like, oh yeah, no, this is easy. Then all of a sudden you're running 5 miles and you're good to go. I'm going to have some water here. Excuse me for 1 second. Okay, so writing a research report. This is what we're going to be doing in class. We sometimes call it a manuscript. Although the results of the studies can be disseminated in other ways and written reports, such as conference presentations, which is why I do so many conference presentations. The research report is a very important mechanism for the dissemination of new knowledge. If you think about it, if I'm giving a presentation on the IRM model of group supervision, which I've done many times, I may have anywhere from 10 to 25 people sitting in the audience because they're interested in it. But if you're not one of those 10 to 25, you're missing the presentation. You're never going to get that. Whereas if I publish something in a journal, it can be accessed over and over and over and over again. Journal articles, books, dissertations, and to a lesser extent, written summaries of conference presentations are the permanent records of counseling research. We don't do a lot of written summaries of conference presentations. That's not something that we typically engage in. Dissertations are not used as professional writing. The dissertation, we're going to talk about this the first night of class. The dissertation is used really as an exercise for you to show the world, kind of, because your dissertation gets published, that you know how to research, that you're a scientist. That's really what the dissertation does, and that you're an expert on one very specific area. It's not meant to have great findings. It's not meant to be used in other research. I mean, you can. When you leave, you can refine your research, but it's more of an activity than professional writing. Books, too. Books really aren't high up on the list of academic writing, believe it or not. Books used to be a really good way for universities to attract students, because if I wrote a book on, I don't know, the Ryan Bauer's Way of Counseling Awesome People book, then students may want to come there because they gravitate to that author because they wrote that, and there would be a lot of notoriety. But textbooks have changed over the years, and we have so many different forms of media that we use in the classroom that textbooks or writing books really on the tenure rank is not that important. Journal articles are the most important. And so that's really where we should be focusing our energy. The presentation of clear and informative research report is a critical step in the research process. So I'm going to go through each section, and this is what you're going to be including in your manuscript. And this will give you, you can come back to this and you can re-watch these sections if you need to. I didn't explain, which I started explaining in the other video that I was creating, that I'm not going to be posting these PDFs, PowerPoints, because I need you guys to watch these videos in order for it to count as your class instruction time. So what you should probably do is, what I would recommend, I should say, is if you have a piece of paper, start taking some notes down now about what's going to be expected in this method of evaluation for the class. So you're going to have to get a title for your manuscript. And this offers a standalone explanation of what your manuscript is doing. And so Ben suggested that the title section should be guided by the data and contain the most important descriptive information about your study. So your title, are you going to come up with it first? Probably not. You're probably going to have some kind of working title that you'll hone as you go along. It should accurately summarize the research, describing the topic and the variables and the designs and the outcome succinctly in about 10 to 12 words. That's it. So it's really, really, really brief. Following that, you're going to have an abstract, and they generally don't exceed 120 to 150 words. And really what the abstract does is it captures from soup to nuts, from start to finish, the study that you're doing. It's not just an explanation of what you're going to be looking at. It has everything in it. It's used for indexing and retrieving articles, and it's right after the title, and it's usually the most often read portion of a research report. Think about it. When you're doing your lit reviews, rarely do we just pull up an article or a manuscript and start reading. We typically read the abstract to find out if it has anything to do with what we're looking at. So your abstract has to be very succinct. It has to be pretty accurate in what you're looking at. It should be summarized in 1 or 2 sentences. Looking at the major sections of the manuscript, including the problem under the investigation, relevant characteristics of the participants and the design and the results as linked to some hypothesis or research question and your conclusion. So you have to have all of those things in your abstract in between 120 and 150 words. That's not easy to do. So again, your abstract has to be one of the last things that you write, because if you're going to be writing about the problem under investigation, characteristics of the participants, design, results, conclusions, then you can't write it to the end anyway. So your abstract should be the very last thing that you write. Everything should be self-contained. The reader should not need to depend on any other section of the report to make sense of what you're saying in the abstract. So avoid abbreviations and acronyms to explain unique terms. And yeah, as I said, this is the section that you should write it last. So wait, your abstract will be the final thing you do. Okay, your introduction. This is the next major heading within your manuscript. It's an introduction to the research report. It sets the stage for the study. It orients the reader to the problem. It develops the rationale for your study. You have to have some sort of rationale while you're looking at the data or while you're conducting the study. And it indicates, specifically as possible, the research question that is being explored or the hypothesis being tested in the study. That shouldn't come off as something that's with a lot of ambiguity or ambiguous. It should be written in there. The hypothesis of, the researcher's hypothesis is X, Y, and Z, or the question is being answered X, Y, and Z. So the intro usually contains these three components: an introduction to the problem, the development of the framework for the study, and a statement of research question or hypotheses. The first component includes a broad statement of the topic area that is being explored, and it orients the reader to the topic and highlight why it's important to investigate. Again, you have to talk about why it's important to investigate this. Not just it's important because I'm interested in it. How is it going to move the field forward? The writer then narrows to a review of the theory and the empirical data that is most relevant to the topic of interest, and this leads to the explication of the framework or the rationale for the study. And so really kind of looking at, kind of giving the person, it's almost like the hook of your paper. You're going to try to get them to really be interested and invested in your paper through the intro. And in this, you're going to start conducting your literature review. This implies a synopsis of one study after another, along with considerable integration and synthesis of the findings. In contrast, the framework consists of the elements connected in some logical way. So the literature cited in the development of the framework should be pertinent to a particular research study. What you should not be doing is giving me a whole entire education on whatever it is that you're studying, right? So you need to just present the really important stuff that are important to your your study that is being conducted. If you're talking about the use of dialectic behavioral therapy on German Shepherds. Why you would do that, I don't know, but let's just say German Shepherds. You are not going to tell me about the history of the German Shepherd, that how they were bred and where they came, that's not pertinent. Nor are you going to tell me about DBT and how it was created and why it was created, because that, even though that information might be important, it is very important, it doesn't have to do with your study. Using, or your thoughts about using the components of DBT while you're working with German Shepherds, that's important to the study for me to understand. So there might be something like mindfulness that might be an intervention that you're using. You will have to explain what that is, because you might have some people who are familiar with your topic but may not know that intervention. So you want to give them that information. So you're not trying to include every single bit of information into the literature review. Remember, this assignment that you're doing is only 25 pages. And I know that sounds like a lot. And the reason why it's 25 pages is because all of our, I would say the vast majority of our manuscript or journals will require it to be 25 pages or less. You're going to spend a lot of time in your discussion, in your methodology, in your results section. You can't have 7 pages of a lit review because it's a waste of time. And people will really not want to read it. And they'll put your manuscript down. So make sure that you're just creating a framework that supports the elements of your study through the literature in the past, which means probably about 20 to 25 different articles that kind of support what you're doing. Again, you're not going to sit there and say, you're not going to detail out every single one. And this is when we talk in the research class, I say, don't just list the articles, you want to integrate them. So at times there's going to be 3 or 4 articles that are saying very similar things. So you'll make a generalized statement about those articles, and then you'll cite 4 articles at once. So you're not just writing, in this study, blah, 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 blah. In this study, blah, blah, like that is the fastest way to get a rejection in the manuscript. So don't do that. You have to integrate your literature into this conceptual framework. And then discussion of any previous findings and theories, and it needs to be intertwined logically. So integrating the material reviewed. If you need to know what this looks like, look at any published journal article. When I asked you to do a lit review, look in the introduction and see what it, or listen to what it sounds like. Nobody says, in this article, blah, 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 said blah, 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 blah. In this article, blah, 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 said blah, blah. Nobody says that. Nobody writes that way. It's not professional writing. So for this class, we're not going to do that. And from going forward, you guys know how to write a lit review the proper way. We're not going to do that anymore. So once the framework has been properly developed, the purpose of the present research should be readily apparent. I should be able to read your framework and be like, okay, so that's why we're doing this. So then the research question and the hypothesis should follow logically from the framework built throughout the introduction. So the hypothesis or the research question is going to be really one of the last things that you put into the introduction section. And the research questions are typically used in descriptive and qualitative studies when the purpose of the research is exploratory rather than predictive. In quantitative studies, the research hypothesis should be used as a critical test and an important theoretical question. So research questions are used for exploratory qualitative studies, and hypotheses are used in critical tests of quantitative studies. So your research hypothesis should be stated unambiguously, and clarify how the discovered relation relates to theoretical predictions. So one commonly suggested format to guide writers in this research writing report, so beginning with the introduction, is the hourglass format. So you're going to come in there, we sometimes call it the funnel for research, and that comes back out. But basically you have this broad understanding, or this broad statement, the grouping of statements of the introduction, why you're doing this, and then you come down and it becomes this very narrow, myopic review of pertinent information in previous literature, and then it comes back out again, talking about the meat that's on the bones of your study, if that makes sense. Hope it makes sense. We can talk about that later if you want. All right, from your introduction, you're going to move to your methodology section, or your methods section. So this describes how the research questions and or hypothesis are examined, including all aspects of how the study was conducted. Methodological considerations are important criteria by which the reviewers and the editors make decisions to reject manuscripts. We do this, we also, going back to including all aspects of how the study was conducted, is because we want to make sure that our studies are replicatable, meaning that somebody can go out and replicate that study and get the same findings that we did. The methods section is typically divided into subsections, including participants, measures, or your variables or instruments that are used, materials, and procedures. So participants, a subsection on participants, should indicate at a minimum the total number of participants represented by N equals participant recruitment and selection procedures and characteristics of the participants. The information should be detailed along a number of dimensions, including but not limited to age, education level, gender, ethnicity, geographic area of residence, and pretest level of functioning depending on what your study looks like. What it should not contain is anything that identifies who they are, which means that you won't say participants were selected from the Chadsford area high school or from Kutztown University. Even though the chances of really identifying somebody are marginal at best, we still don't want to identify anybody, so we leave all that information out. We would say participants were selected from a school in the northeast section of America, or something along those lines, northeast section of the country. Measures or variable or instruments. The purpose of the measure section is to operationalize the constructs to which the research question and or hypothesis refers. So for a quantitative study that utilizes participant responses to survey instruments, This subsection includes discussion about the instruments being used, an overview of the scoring properties of each instrument, and the description of psychometric support for the instrument. And if you were in my class for assessment, you know all about that already. For qualitative and descriptive studies, the label for this subsection and its contents will vary depending upon the method of qualitative inquiry used. For example, if you're using phenomenological, grounded theory, ethnography, you're going to talk a little bit about what that is. So it's almost like a mini literature review of what is happening within the qualitative field. This subsection generally includes information regarding the information gathering procedures used in the study, information regarding questions and probes used with the participants, including the rationale for these questions and the probes that were selected and presented. In addition, the process by which the researchers made decisions regarding the extent to which questions and probes were permitted to evolve over time or not may be included in this subsection. So, I mean, if you're creating your own lists of questions, you may want to talk about that rationale of why you created and then how you kind of verified or validated those questions to measure what it's supposed to measure. For example, sometimes I will create assessment questions and then I will give them to another expert to make sure that it is measuring what I'm intending to measure through their scope of where they scientifically their field, and if they say yeah they're good, then I will kind of put that into my reports. Details about how interview data were transcribed may be also summarized as well. Maybe not, depending on what you're doing. Finally, other sources of data that were utilized throughout the project, field notes may be described in that section. That has more to do with the qualitative piece. Material subsection describes any materials other than the measures or the instruments used in the study. Sufficient information should be given to enable the independent researcher to reproduce this material and to replicate this study. So if you use some kind of compensation, you paid $20 for each participant to fill out their survey, which is a lot of money, but you may do that. You want to put that in there. Not that that's a bad thing. We do that at times, but you need to put that in there because if you're going to claim that you had an N of 500, which is a lot, and you had 500 people complete this study, people are going to wonder, how did you get so many people to take that test or that assessment? And then when you tell them that you gave them $20, it's like, oh, okay, well, that totally makes sense. And the level of detail varies based upon publication outlets of whoever's going to publish. And then the procedure describes the steps in which the participants completed the research, typically organized chronologically, and includes information related to the interactions with participants from the beginning to the end of the study. Additional details might depend on the study being that has been designed as well. So if we kind of go back and talk about the lit review for a second, most people think that the lit review is going to take up the most amount of space within those 25 pages, but I'm asking you to put all these subsections in as well. So if you're putting these subsections in, you can see that this is going to eat up a ton of space within your paper. So now you have to think about, okay, well, how can I write my lit review in a more succinct way in order to be able to fit all of this in? You're also going to have your design and the analysis. Provides the reader with clear understanding of the overall study design. After reading this subsection, the reader should understand how the research questions were explored and how the hypotheses were tested. A design and analysis section should include sufficient information as how to provide a very clear picture of what was done, how it was done, how the data were analyzed, as to prime the reader for the presentation of the results. And then the results the section is to summarize the results of the analysis used in the study. So the results section should report the findings, but the discussion of the results and the interpretations based on the findings are saved for the discussion section. So the results are literally the results. Don't tell me your interpretation. Don't give me any type of discussion about the results. The results are just the results. So here is where we're just going to take, if we're using something quantitative, we're going to take our SPS data outputs, we're going to format them into tables, and we're going to write a section about what the ANOVA analysis gave us. That's it. You don't have to put anything else in there. We'll talk more about that in your discussion section. Results specific to research hypothesis should be organized so that the reader can directly tie the results of the statistical test to the research hypothesis stated earlier within the manuscript. All right, and then we move to the discussion session. Now you get to talk about the cool things that you found or the cool things that you didn't find. This allows the author to expand upon findings and to place the results into the context of previous research and theory on this topic. So you're going to have the following thing. So the explanation of the results of the data analysis, whether or not the data supported your research hypothesis, and if it doesn't, that's okay. It doesn't have to do it. Well, it doesn't have to. And we should be writing where we're going to report on anything that doesn't support our hypothesis as well. Statement of the conclusion and interpretation of the findings in lieu of current theory and research, an honest overview of the study's limitations. You have limitations. We all have limitations in our studies, whether it was too few people, whether it was whatever it may be, but you have to listen. The honest overview of the limitations tells readers not what's wrong with your research, but it tells us just how honest you're being about and how objective you're being with your research. Discussion and direction for future research and discussion of the implications that can be drawn from the research. So just some general principles for writing a research report. So be informative. The goal of the research report is to inform the reader about the study, provide enough detail for it to be understood, and so that we understand what you're doing, but not becoming bogged down in the details. You might be really stoked about the details of it. It may not be something that needs to be included. This is why you have somebody who can help you read. Obviously, the researcher should not report everything that they did, but they must provide enough so that people can understand, and enough so that your study can be replicated as well. Be forthright. You should be able to discuss the ramifications of the study's limitations rather than trying to hide its flaws. Signs of hidden flaws include obtuse language, esoteric statistical tests with improper justification, omitted information, and overstated justifications. And I see the overstatement of justifications way too often, or language that just doesn't fit what the results say. Flaws necessitate a fundamental decision. If a flaw is fatal to the study, like a confounding variable that cannot be minimized, then it's best to consider the study a time-consuming learning experience. Everything you do in research is a learning experience. And just because there were some issues, again, doesn't mean that it's a bad study. It just is going to inform you for your future study. Excuse me while I have some more water. Okay. Do not overstate or exaggerate. There's a widely shared tendency to believe that every study will somehow change the course of the field. You may find something and it may not do anything or change anything, and that's okay. It's highly unusual that one research study is sufficient to stand alone or to change the course of research or clinical practice. Highly unusual. What you're doing is you're informing future practice. You're not finding out something that's going to change the world. And unsupported statements most often appear in the discussion section of a manuscript, and this is, again, why it's important to have an editor. And I see so many times in manuscripts where people use, and I don't think it's purposeful that they do this, but they'll say things like, and the research study proved that blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, your research study is not proving. It's showing a correlation, or it's showing some kind of dependence, but it's not proving anything. Be logical and organized. The written report is not a recitation of facts. It's really just an overview of everything. So the author must persuade the reader that there's a solid rationale for the study and that the claims that are being made within are then justified. And you do this through writing concisely and succinctly, and not trying to give every single just fact that happened. So first, begin writing with an outline. I think that's good in all of our writing. Provide organizers with summaries of complex materials. Don't give primary sources. Don't use quotations. Things like that. Use summaries, but don't go too in depth. Third, use headings to organize the manuscript and assist the reader by highlighting core components. And finally, introduce transition statements between topics to highlight how two different topics or how logical arguments are connected. Following the completion of the research report, manuscripts are submitted for review, which means that you need to select a place that you're going to send your manuscript, a place that's going to look it over and see if it's worthy of being publishing. The manuscript submission process involves a series of steps. I have been involved with two separate processes. One writing for the Pennsylvania Counseling Association's journal, where within 3 months our paper was published. And then I had another experience that is still ongoing with the Journal of Counselor Education and Supervision, where 2 years ago we submitted a paper, it was accepted, and we're hoping it's going to be published this summer. So it's been almost 2 years for that. So there's many steps, and so each journal is going to be a little bit different in times and researchers, and so you kind of have to just be able to go with the flow. Description for submitting manuscripts to journals are listed on web pages for those journals, so we'll be taking a look at that. And there are instructions for submission, including electronic manuscript submission portals, some you email to people, so we'll take a look at all of those different things. But once you submit, you will get, within a month, typically you'll get an email or a letter, and you'll get one of the 4 common outcomes, which is a rejection, which means they don't want it, and that's okay. Then that may mean that it's not the right article or the right journal for you, or maybe that we have to do some revision with the manuscript. Revise and resubmit, meaning that it's a good topic, but there's some things that need to change. And what happens is when you submit, the editor sends it out to assistant editors, and then we look over and we add comments and we critique, and then we send back to the editor, and then the editor will get the paper with all the comments and critiques back to the author. And usually with CENS, where I was part of, we had 5 different assistant editors reviewing. Excuse me. So there was a lot of comments, and typically what happens is that we'll say like, oh, you should try this or you should try that. And then if you make those changes and resubmit, you may get a provisional acceptance, which means that it's really good, we like it. There's just a few things that maybe need to be changing, like maybe there's some editorial pieces, maybe there's some spelling or some grammar, which there should never be in a submission, but there definitely are. Or there's some heading issues, whatever it may be. So it's accepted, but you have to make these changes first. And then there's the acceptance, where we love it, it looks great, we accept it. I would say I've never seen a full acceptance of a paper before. There's always some kind of editing. So the rejection is the most common. Revise and resubmit happens every now and then, but provisional acceptances are what you're commonly going to find in really well-written papers. And that's all that we have for this. Okay, so hopefully this clears up what we were, or the method of evaluation for the research project, the manuscript that we're going to be writing. We're going to get into a little bit more in class, like how you're going to get your data, because obviously we haven't submitted anything to the IRB, so we can't use human participants, but there are large data sets that are available free of charge on the internet, and I'm going to introduce you to some of them, and we'll see exactly what type of studies we can get going. And my goal is that by the last class that you or your group of the group of students have a 25-page manuscript ready, and we'll submit to a manuscript of your choosing, and we will see if it gets accepted or not. And for those of you that want to get into a doc program, if you get a manuscript printed, that's gold. That's really, really, really great. Not everybody gets that before they get into a doc program. So, all right. So this is going to be the second video, but it's going to be posted first, so you'll probably get that. Please watch. There should be 3 more videos coming out this week that I will ask you to watch for the didactic component of this class, and I will see you guys on Monday night, 6 o'clock, and we will have a good time. All right, take care.